Hey everyone, it's Alan with 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏. Welcome back to another new video. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you how I make marbled wax melts. This is a technique that I've been working on for the last few months, and I'm finally ready to share it. And we're also going to be talking about how to make really strong wax melts. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, the strength is not only what makes you happy, but it's what's going to bring your customer back. Now, I'm just starting off using a little bit of this black. We're gonna start making Gothic Rose. We're gonna do a bunch of different scents, but Gothic Rose, the aesthetic for it is black with red. And this Cardinal Red is my personal favorite. These dyes all come from Black Tie Barn, by the way. The ingredients are really good. And that's what drew me to these dyes as someone who normally doesn't use dyes to begin with. So as you can see here, I'm starting off with just adding one drop, and I kind of showed it at the beginning, but the key here is it's not even one drop. So basically I had emptied this pipette or this dropper all the way so that there wasn't anything in there hardly. And I just took the tip of it because it's so easy to get a big drop with these eyedroppers. And I was barely touching the tip of it. And now I'm going in with some of this gold eco glitter. I get this from Brambleberry, but you know, I feel like any eco glitter is gonna be what you want. Most glitter is made from PET plastic or other types of plastics. And you definitely, in my opinion, don't want that in your house because when you're using a wax melt, you're gonna be heating it up. And you could just omit the glitter entirely. I just personally like the aesthetic of it. Now, if you would like the full formula for all of these wax melts, you can check out my Patreon down below, where I not only share the full formula for these melts, but also all the formulas for 𝗏𝗏𝗘𝗏, as well as I give one-on-one support, so you can ask me your candle making questions and I'll respond to the best of my ability in a secure chat within 24 hours. A lot of makers have found that really helpful, but I will, as always, be going through the entire process in this video and sharing a ton of information. So, as you can see here, I'm starting off with these piston funnels, which I'll have linked below. This is how I'm able to get really good control. And I am just going right over where those two very small micro drops of dye are. And what I'm making sure of, and this is the hardest thing, this is how I've wasted so many of these melts in the process of coming up with my technique, which I still think is the best way to do this, but it's not foolproof. You have to go very light on the dye, number one, very light, as you saw. But then number two, when you're letting the wax go into the clamshells, you want to make sure that the dye gets moved around enough so that it's not just sitting at the bottom, and then when you go to remove the melt, it ends up being a clump of dye. And we're going to get more into how you can avoid that in just a little bit. Now, I'm choosing to top these with a little bit more of that gold eco glitter. And you could see just a second ago, I was prepping more of these clamshells. So for each of these, I use usually 2 different colors of dye. And sometimes I use one color, but 2 drops of the same color. It really doesn't matter. It just depends on what aesthetic you're going for. Now, I tend to like the aesthetic of not having each and every cavity the same. It's not always possible. And as you can see here on this one that I'm doing, this is what you want to try to avoid if at all possible. Do you see how that dye was kind of dripping down before I even started? That's going to be really hard to get to move the way that I want it to. Now, the whole theory behind this technique was putting the 2 drops of dye on top like this so that when you're basically using physics to your advantage, that inertia from the wax coming out of the piston funnel is going to help to push that dye around and to help to get it to mix into those beautiful marbled patterns that we love so much. Now, you just saw me a second ago going in there with a chopstick, a metal chopstick, and I was manually swirling that one little spot a little bit. And then I just went in there with a butane torch, which I'll have the one I use linked below. It's just a creme brulee torch, super easy to use. I turned that on not even the lowest setting. It's like no setting, pretty much. And it will help if you get air bubbles and you can quickly pop those. You never want to use a heat gun on these wax melts. It's going to get too hot, even on the lowest setting, for these plastic clamshells, and it'll just cause them to melt and warp. Now, that's why I said with the creme brulee torch, you go on a setting that's not even a setting, and it just uses that little bit of oomph, very focused right where those air bubbles are to quickly get rid of them. And you can do this with any wax that you're using. Usually the air bubbles will come because you're pouring a little bit at too cool of a temperature, which, especially when you're doing more advanced techniques like this, it can happen. It's not going to affect your hot throw, but you do just want to make sure you omit those air bubbles. Now, you just saw me kind of bend down a little bit over these. What I was doing there was making sure that the top of the wax melt is flush with the container. And I like to do that just because I'm literally a 5-year-old at heart, you guys, and I'll feel like I'm getting gypped a little bit if my container isn't completely full. And so I just like to make sure that my customers get a really full wax melt. So off to the left here, what I like to do is I like to make samples at the same time as I make the wax melts. Now, these I include for free with each order. And it's a really great way. You can take whatever scent your customer is getting and include a sample in that same scent family so that they can kind of know what else you have. And then they'll oftentimes come right back and purchase that other scent that you included, especially when you take that extra step and make sure that it's in the same scent family as the one that they already purchased. Now, I like to use, it's actually a total of 32 ounces of wax, and I use about 12% fragrance for my wax melts. So when I'm making a batch of these, it'll be 32 ounces of wax and 3.8 ounces of fragrance. For every single scent, that's how I like to do it. There are a couple of exceptions. On scents that are really weak, I'll go up to like 15%, but that's very unusual. Usually 12%, you're gonna get this to work really well. And not only really well, but with my formula for the custom wax blend that's available in my Patreon, you are able to have a wax melt that oftentimes will last for, our customers have said, a couple of days. I like to say 5 hours per melt. So that's a total of 5 times 6 or 30 hours per clamshell. But our customers have said that that is very understated, that they tend to sometimes even get a couple days out of just 2 of the clamshells, which I would say only should last about 10 hours. But totally depends on where you're placing it. I always like to make sure that customers also use a 20 to 25 watt bulb. That is going to help them to burn at the optimal temperature so that they're releasing just enough scent to really fill the room, but not too much scent so that the melt runs out too fast. Because with wax melts, the way that the scent is releasing is you're heating it with that bulb and it's getting to a temperature so that the fragrance molecules become airborne. And so there's no chemical change happening. It's just a physical change. They're going from being suspended in the wax to suspended in the air. And that's why we call it scent throw. It literally throws them into the air with a candle as well. But with wax melts, it's just that physical change of the fragrance molecules being bound to the wax to the fragrance molecules being bound to the air. And keeping the bulb between 20 and 25 watts is going to be ideal to release just the right amount so that they have that longevity, but also that punch that you want them to pack. So just a little tip there. Now this one, I absolutely adore this color. This is navy, and again, they're black tie barn dyes. I really like these dyes. There's a lot of great colors. I'm not sponsored or affiliated with that brand, but it is one of my favorites. I just think they make a lot of great quality fragrances, but also I've been playing around with the dyes, as you can see here too, and have just loved them. So I used 2 drops of navy on this one, and this is our North Pier scent, which I absolutely adore. It's a whole story. If you go to the website, you'll see a lot of these I have written little stories for, and that's kind of one of our selling points. Is I just love doing that. Fragrance is so connected to memory, and it's just a lot of fun. Now, you can also see how they're not all the same. So they're gonna have varying amounts of marbling. This is not a technique I would recommend if you're trying to create an extremely uniform product. You have to remember me, I'm used to oftentimes making concrete candles. I've sold rocks and minerals. Every single one is unique, and that adds to the value in my opinion. But you may want to put a little statement on your website that there's going to be some variation in marbling. And just like in natural marble, that is part of what makes it unique. And oftentimes I find that customers really like that. Now you can see there, I just went and dabbed a tiny bit of that dye off. This is a feel thing. As you do this more and more, you're going to get used to just how much dye you need to dab off so that you don't get these clumps of dye at the base. I would never recommend going above those 2 micro drops though per 2.5 ounce is what I sell these as. that's the fill weight, that the net weight of wax plus fragrance. I would never recommend going above 2 micro drops for one of these because it's simply going to be too much dye for you to be able to get mixed. And one other thing I want to mention that you're going to find is if you bring the piston funnel closer down and pour at a slower rate, but you're kind of moving it in like a slight circular motion, as you can see I'm doing here, you are going to mix more. If you pull it back and raise it up, you're going to mix less. And that is because the amount of focus that that stream has diffuses as it gets higher up in the air. So think about it like a little hose nozzle. If you have that hose on the same pressure, but you're super close, you're gonna feel it more. But if you pull it back, you're gonna feel it less. And that's the exact thing that it does to the dye in these melts. So if you wanna mix it more, get closer. And if you wanna mix it less, pull it back further. Now, you can see here, I am manually going in again with a chopstick, and that is because I still wasn't able to swirl to the extent that I wanted to. And this is gonna be a feel thing. You're gonna have to do this and try it and test them to make sure that you don't have residual dye at the base of these. But because I've made hundreds of these at this point, developing this technique, I know that these just weren't mixed quite enough. And so I went down there with a metal chopstick, and I can link some below. You can probably just get them at the grocery store. But I'm just manually swirling those little spots so that there's no dye left at the base. Now, I love this color. This is a combination of, well, that last one was 2 different amber colors. I'll put the names up on the screen. And then this one is a combination of saffron and olive. And I am absolutely obsessed with how these 2 colors mix together. This is for our 𝗏𝗏𝗄 Manor wax melt. And once, you're gonna have to wait till the end of this video to see how gorgeous these are. I'm gonna include some footage once these set up, but they're absolutely stunning. And I love all the earth tones of some of these dyes. Now, I like to wait until the end to add the warning labels and the outer labels on the container. And that is because sometimes when you are doing this, you will spill just a little bit, and you just have to go in with a paper towel to wipe it up. And if you already put the warning label on, it can be difficult to do that. Now, you saw at the end of that pour, I kind of raised the piston funnel up, and that is because I was trying to not mix nearly as much. And you can see how they look kind of a little bit cloudy as well. It's gonna end up being almost an ombre effect on the top, and then on the base, you're gonna see that beautiful marbling. Now, I would definitely recommend doing this in clear clamshells, not black, because the main spot where you're gonna see the effect is at the base. And as I said, when I'm doing this, I'm only using about 32 ounces of wax plus 3.8 ounces of fragrance per pitcher. And if you get more going than that at a time, it's simply too much, in my opinion. And your wax, you're just not gonna have enough time to pour. So I never do multiple pitchers when I'm doing wax melts, because there's not enough time for me to be able to pour and use this kind of fancier technique. So it does take a little bit longer, but in my opinion, it's very worth it. And you can see some of them on the top have a little bit of marbling, but it's more of like an ombre effect that you will see on the top of these. And then I'll show you at the end what the base ends up looking like. Now, this custom blend does really good for taking dyes, and it also does really, really good, like I said, with scent longevity. So you're gonna see, look at how gorgeous that is. I am obsessed. And the cool thing about this technique too is you never get dye in your piston funnel or your pouring pitcher. The dye specifically stays with each individual scent. So there's no cleanup whatsoever. You just have to make sure with these dyes, especially when you're doing like with the eyedropper, that you get really, really, really close so that you're not accidentally splashing it. It's very easy to do with dyes, and they're really concentrated. So here's how this first batch turned out. We're gonna do another batch, and I'm gonna get more into how I set up the wax melts in general and maximize counter space, because I do this out of my kitchen, just like a lot of you guys probably do. And it can be really, really, really hard to just have enough room to make an efficient batch. So what I like to do is when I'm preparing these clamshells, and I get these right on Amazon. You can get them from a number of suppliers. I've actually found the best price for these clamshells on Amazon, and I'll have the ones that I'm using linked below, as well as all of our other Amazon supplies you can always get in my Amazon storefront, which you'll see down below. But what I like to do is lay out sets of 10, and I will then invert the other ones like this. So you can see how you've got one facing forward and one facing backward. Now, this does two things. It not only maximizes your counter space, but it also helps if some of the tops on these 6 cavity clamshells are leaning upwards a little bit, you're using the weight of another one to hold it down. So it helps them to stay flat better, in my opinion. And you'll see again with this die, I only went in once, totally emptied the pipette, so there wasn't even any drops of dye, and then I'm just barely grazing the top. And then if you end up getting too much dye on one, you can then go to the other where you have that same color and take a little bit back and just kind of use that to do the next one. Very rarely do I actually go back into the bottle a second time to get 10 micro drops of color. I know I keep talking about this, but this is honestly the hardest part. And this is what, has made me lose like hundreds of these, is either not getting the dye mixed in well enough or adding too much to begin with and then trying to get rid of it. And as you saw the last time I did these, you can use a paper towel to go ahead and dab off that excess amount of dye, just so that way you don't lose the whole wax melt or have to end up going in with that metal chopstick to manually swirl it. Now, I found with color combinations, pretty much anything looks good in my opinion. Like even two colors that you normally wouldn't blend together, you can get to work really well with this technique as long as you don't over mix them. So like if you're using, like here, I'm using like a saffron color and then like a teal. But I'm trying to kind of keep them a little bit more separated than you saw me doing with more of the similar colors. Because, I want them to not over blend, especially when I don't consider them looking that good when they're together. But in this case, I was trying to go with these two colors because this is kind of this is for the Calm. The Calm uses the Sacred Fog fragrance by Black Tie Barn, and it's like a sandalwood type of a vibe, but then it also has some mountain myrtle to it, and it just has this fresh, crisp air quality, but also has this woody, earthy quality to it from all the sandalwood. So I was trying to reflect both of those in the colors, which is kind of hard with these two colors, but you'll see at the end just how well this does end up working. I feel like in general with the two different colors, it does look more aesthetically appealing just because it can reflect multiple different scent notes within your wax melt. These honestly right now, to me, look almost like water and sand, which I like the vibe of, but they're gonna get even better once they fully solidify. And I can't wait to show you. Now you can see in the back there, actually now it's to the left of me, how I have that one where there's that little drip down the side. And that is gonna be especially hard to get rid of without using a chopstick. So I probably will end up using a chopstick for that, because what happens is, part of the reason why is the wax or the dye is already like partly hardened because it's so thinned out. And so even when I go in there with that hot wax, it's not gonna be likely, even with the combination of, 180 degree wax plus the pressure of it coming down from the piston funnel, it's still not gonna be able to swirl it in that one streak. And that one streak is going to remain just like it is and become a spot in the clamshell where there's undissolved dye. Now, that will not affect the performance of your wax melt, in my opinion, at all. It's not like a candle. Wax melts are actually much more foolproof, in my opinion, than making candles, because you don't have to deal with the combustion. As we were talking about earlier, it's literally just the fragrance molecules are bound from the wax to being bound to the air. It's just a physical change. But what happens is when your customer goes to take out that wax melt, they can get some of that dye on their hands because it's not fully dissolved. And that's where you want to make sure that if you have a spot like that, you do go in with that metal chopstick and really make sure that that spot is fully swirled and that there's wax, kind of coming around it so it's not stuck at the base. Now, as you can see, when I'm pouring these samples, I'm not using any dye. I have tried this technique. Well, you can't actually do this technique with single cavity clamshells because there's no divider in the middle. If I were to just put a drop at the very bottom of these, this wouldn't work at all because there wouldn't be enough of a drop in order to create the swirl. It would just stay stuck at the bottom mainly. And that is actually the first thing that I tried when doing this technique with, well, when trying to do a marbled technique with the wax melts, is I thought, okay, I don't have to get all fancy and put it in the center. I can just put a drop at the bottom of 2 of these clamshells or 2 of these cavities within the 6 cavity clamshell. The problem with that is it just stays localized to that one spot, and then you'll end up again with that clump of dye at the base. Whereas when you put it up higher like this, that like half-inch drop to get to the bottom of the clamshell just optimizes the swirl, whereas in the single cavities, you don't have that ability at all. I hope I'm making sense. If you guys do have questions, please leave them down below. This is a really fun technique, but I would highly, highly encourage, even after watching this whole video, to try it in small batches, a very small batch, like, you know, just literally you can take like to use the milk frothing pitchers. I'll link one down below like you use for coffee. And you can just make a couple of these at once. With that, you want to definitely use a much smaller pitcher when you're making a smaller batch because otherwise your wax is going to, you know, have too much surface area and it will cool too fast on you if you try to use like a full pouring pitcher. Whereas with the coffee pitchers, it's gonna work a lot better, and then you can just pour that into the piston funnel and just make a really tiny batch of these. And I would highly recommend doing that and popping them out and testing them. You can even literally test them the next day, at least if you use my formula for, you know, it's a blend of 2 different waxes. They don't need to cure really at all, just enough for the wax to solidify. And you're gonna be able to see right away if that dye is stuck at the base or if you got it to work out properly. And once you do a few dozen, you're really gonna get a feel for what you're looking for, combined with, you know, how I'm kind of describing things in this video. It is really a combination of learning the technique, but then also a feel thing of you have to practice it a lot and then also go in and pull them out of the clamshell and test it to make sure that you in fact did get that dye mixed all the way in. But you can see how when it falls down, it disperses almost instantly, where if I were to just put it at the base, it would stay totally clumped. Trust me, I've tried it. So with the samples, I don't put any dye in them. It's just much easier to totally avoid it than to end up with this, you know, not aesthetic looking drop that stays at the base. So this can be a lot of fun, and it can be really, really cool to create these unique custom colors. You could even take 2 colors that are really similar, and you'll end up getting more movement and variation in depth when you blend them together, or when you use 1 drop of each, I should say. Now, one thing that I just did there, but actually that I'm doing right now that you can't really see. So I ran just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of wax over that paper towel where that drop of dye was, and then I lightly squeezed it back into the cavity. And you can see how that melt went from being really, really light, and I'm just doing a little bit more here, to again having more of that marbling. Now, you definitely don't have to do that. You can just leave it how it was. But a few times where I did have a little bit too much variation, you can see I just did it again. I did that, and then I once again reintegrated the dye that way. And it can also create some really cool marbling effects, but definitely be careful with it. You don't want to add too much wax onto the paper towel because you don't want to get little pieces of paper towel in your clamshell. It's just gross, you know. It's not really going to hurt anything, but it's just gross. But you definitely don't do that if you just add the teeniest bit of wax over that dye and then squeeze the paper towel to get that dye back in. And I only did that a few times. I hesitated to even include this little tip in there because it does sound kind of gross, but you can create some really cool marbling patterns that way. Now, this next one here, I'm doing for the Badass. And the Badass uses the Bandit by Black Tie Barn. It's one of our most popular scents. And I'm using black and violet for the 2 colors. Now, I've kind of gone between thinking that scent is more of like a blue tone to a purple tone to an indigo tone. And I oftentimes do that with fragrances. Are you like that as well, where you'll think of them like in terms of different colors? I oftentimes do that. And I don't know if they call it like synesthesia. I don't think I have that, but I think of scent oftentimes in colors. And I would highly encourage you, especially even if you don't dye your candles, to consider something like this for your wax melts, because it can really make them come to life. And then on the top, you can use a label that doesn't quite go all the way over, so that you have some of that wax showing through the label around the corners, and your customer can see the combination of that color with your scent, and it just brings it to life more, in my opinion. But I'm also 5, so there's that. I really do tend to notice, though, that customers oftentimes prefer products that really come to life. You almost have to, when you're marketing, think about marketing to a little kid. You have to spell it out, because consumers are already in a really saturated market, and you want to make sure that your product stands out, and they don't want to have to take all this time to read into it. You want to make it really straightforward for them so that they can just approach it and have fun. Now let's talk a little bit more before we finish this video about hot throw and wax melts. So this is a topic that actually is not nearly as difficult as talking about hot throw and candles. The biggest thing is to use good fragrances, strong fragrances. I always talk about Candle Science, Black Tie Barn, and Stone Candles. Those are my 3 favorite companies. But any fragrance oils that tend to do well for you in candles will often perform very well for you in wax melts. And some fragrances that don't do very well for you in candles will really come to life in wax melts. You do want to make sure that you're using waxes, though, that optimize hot throw. So my custom blend is a combination of IGI 6006 and IGI 4625. Now, I'm also going to put a formula on my Patreon for how you can take any wax and make it into a wax melt. So you could take your wax that you use for your candles, and you could use this blend, the combination of that IGI 4625, and make that into a tart wax. You're essentially just hardening it a little bit, because what you want when you're doing a wax melt is something that's going to have enough hardness to pop out of the clamshell. And that's why we call certain ones tart waxes and certain ones container waxes. Tart wax is pretty synonymous with like a pillar wax, and they tend to have higher melt points, and they will not need a container in order to hold their shape, and they will have that kind of snappy effect that you love when you're taking that wax out of the clamshell and you don't have all this residual wax in there. So you could use a container wax in a clamshell, but it's just not going to be very clean, and it's not going to fully all come out of the clamshell because the melt point is too low, and it's not made to be a tart wax, to be a wax that doesn't have a container around it. It's not made to pop out without leaving that residual wax behind. But it does work better for combustion, candle burning, but it doesn't work as well for votives or wax melts or pillars. I hope that makes sense. So these melts that you're making when you're doing wax melts need to have a wax that has a higher melt point. And the other thing that you want is a wax that optimizes hot throw. Now, I've used a number of different tart waxes. I'll put some of my favorites up on the screen. There's a lot of different ones that you can use, but I tend to find that this combination that I use in this custom blend really optimizes hot throw. So your customer with a lot of these scents is just going to get a lot more longevity. I should say it optimizes longevity, because I've gotten good hot throw with a lot of different things. I've even tried my custom beeswax soy cocoa cream blend in wax melts, and it works really well as a tart wax. It pops out really well. It has a good throw, but you don't get the same longevity. So it's not going to last nearly as long as a lot of the scents do with this custom blend. I hope that makes sense, but it's definitely something if you're really struggling with candles, especially, well, also, you can check out all my hot throw playlists and videos, and I'll have some of those linked down below, and I'll link one of my recent hot throw videos up on the screen. I would recommend checking out that before you totally give up on candles. I've also got a number of other videos on waxes and wicks, and if you have any other questions about hot throw and would like more videos, let me know down below and I can do that. But if you're still just struggling, well, you can also check out my Patreon too, and I offer one-on-one support there. But if you've done all that and you're still just not having fun with making candles, definitely try making wax melts, because you're gonna find in general that they're just across the board a lot easier, and a lot of things that don't work in candles will work in melts. And it can be really rewarding, especially if you're struggling a lot, to be able to make a product that does perform really well. And I would say that you're able to overall get a much better hot throw from, because if you think about it, the way that you get a hot throw from a candle is that melted pool of wax. Now think about what a wax melt is. It's a giant, deep melted pool of wax with a pretty wide diameter. I mean, most tart warmers are, 3.5 inches across, and they're pretty deep. So you're getting very quickly a wide and deep melt pool of wax, and that is going to translate to really good hot throw. Just make sure that that bulb is 20 to 25 watts in your warmer. I hope that this one was helpful for you guys. I'm going to show at the end some more footage of what these melts do look like, and we have them all on our website. These are all for our serotonin collection, so you are able to go ahead and check them out. I'll post a little coupon code for you as well in the description of this video, just as a thank you for being a viewer of our channel. And if you do have any other questions about wax melts, please leave them down below in the comments. I am more than happy to answer as many as I can. And if there's any other topics for future videos that you would like, I know hot throw is a really big one, and that's why I'm trying to underscore just making wax melts in general, especially if you're struggling with hot throw, because you can very quickly restore your confidence, I would say, with wax melts. Candles are much harder. Think about the most challenging thing with a candle being the wicking. And when you're doing a wax melt, you totally omit that. So it can be really fun and rewarding to make, especially if you're really struggling with candles. Again, I'll have all the supplies that I'm using linked down below. And a lot of these you can get right on Amazon, like the clamshells and the piston funnels. The piston funnel is an absolute must for wax melts, I would say, because you really need that focused stream, especially if you're going to try this marbling technique. And the piston funnel, in my opinion, is the only way to do that. It's the best way to do that, and it just makes it a lot easier. So anyway, enjoy this footage at the end, sharing what these look like. And for now, I'm sending all of you peace, love, and light. And I'm wishing all of you happy melt making. I'd like to take the time to thank my patrons for their incredible support.
Trusting your instincts, realize that knowing looks different to each. When living authentic, do more exploring, deeper than knowing just what is essential for life that is thriving. Go deep, mute out the chatter, feel it, burn off the fire, let go until there's peace to your core. Live a life you adore. a life you adore. Live a life you adore.
Keep being yourself, stay authentic at all costs, and never lose your spark, because that's what makes your brand uniquely you. I'm rooting for you, and I know you have what it takes to be successful and to have fun with this craft. Until next time, happy candle making.